Okay, welcome everybody to the 77th straight episode of History Matters, which I just say with pride because I mean, really, 77 straight episodes. We are today going to be talking about posturing by politicians. I will confess that when I wrote this yesterday and almost tweeted it, it said postering. I had an E instead of the U, and I kept looking at it going, something's wrong. Posturing and what it does and why it's not necessarily a good thing, but why it's a problem in a democratic government. But before I say anything else along those lines, I turn to my partner in crime, Matt, who will now offer the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for making time for us on this beautiful Friday. It's going to be beautiful, at least. It's been gray here and in northern Michigan for several days. So we're excited to see the sun again. Hopefully you're seeing the sun wherever you're at as well. The rules of the game are as follows. We encourage you to use chat. Please type in as many things as possible. We'd like to see your conversation. We do ask that you keep it family friendly and germane to the conversation, at least to whatever extent you feel is appropriate. If you do have questions, make sure you put them in Q&A. That's where I'll take questions. And please put in lots of questions. I like lots of questions because your questions have been amazing for the last, 77 weeks or so. So please put those in. But make sure you put them in Q&A because I don't want to happen to miss it over chat. And as always, if you do like what we're doing here at the National Council of History Education, please join us. You can go to our website, www.ncheteach.org, and peruse our content. We have some great things going on, including we have now announced our webinar series for the fall. So there will, I think, be one more that we'll add, but right now we have them all the way through November, including the estimable Kevin Cruz next month, which we're very excited to have him do a presentation for us. In addition, we will be announcing our first two colloquia, teachers colloquia for 2022. Those will be announced either today or tomorrow, or today or Monday. And we'll start taking reservations. I can tell you that they are going to be with NASA and the Astronauts Memorial Foundation, examining the space race. That will be one. So if you want to spend a couple days in Florida in January, please join us. And then the other one will be in February in Nashville. We're partnering with the Musicians Hall of Fame to examine music of the early 20th century. Alan Lomax, Ralph Peer. So it's going to be a fantastic time. Really excited for those. So
that's great.
So those are coming up. Please watch out for those. And then we also have some other great stuff. We have a ton of stuff coming up. So please join us. Please watch out because there's going to be just a flurry of opportunities with National Council for History Education this coming year. So really excited for those. With that, I'll turn it back over to Joanne and we will get going for the day.
Okay. And thank you, newbie, for tuning in. Okay. And I think my audio might be a little bit better now because so you, Matt, said that you had spoken for 5 whole minutes on mute. Mm-hmm. I forgot to turn on my microphone. But it's on now. So
excellent.
Okay. And yes, and newbie does indeed say good morning. He's great timing. He knows. Okay. So today, hang on a sec. Let me fix the view here. Excellent. So today we are going to talk about posturing by politicians, not postering, but posturing by politicians. It is something that is not unique to a democracy. And I always tell my students not to use the word unique first or only unless you really know it's unique first or only, because 9 out of 10 times you're going to be wrong. And so posturing by politicians is certainly not unique to democratic modes of government, but there is a distinctive kind of posturing in democratic modes of government where politicians, particularly in legislatures, but also, I suppose, executives of various sorts, governors and presidents, but particularly in legislatures, they have to, on the one hand, perform for the people who give them votes and power. And so there you get a good deal of posturing. However, they're not doing that in isolation. So whatever it is that they're doing has an impact on the dynamics of power on the floor and what gets done in the legislature that they're in. So posturing ends up being part of appealing to the public in a way in a democracy, but clearly even just the word suggests it's not neutral. There's nothing neutral about it. So it can complicate things, which is some of what we're seeing today. And that's really what I want to talk about this morning. It's one of the things I will note that interested me in the most recent book that I wrote on physical violence in the US Congress. What I was interested in, among other things, was what happens when you have a national legislative body with Southerners and Northerners and Westerners, and they all have different understandings or assumptions about behavior and law and order and fighting and manliness and everything else. There's like slightly cultural differences. What happens when you put them in a room together and then they have to hash out vitally important issues that will affect the nation and their home base? What does that do? What happens? And of course, the book reveals what happens is Northerners, so Southerners are and were much more comfortable with man-to-man combat than Northerners, who preferred the riot as a mode of violence. And in Congress, man-to-man combat and dueling, having that on your side gives you a certain degree of power, which is what my book really details, is how Southern slaveholders used that power to protect and promote slavery in Congress. But that was what I was interested in, is what does the Southern posturing do when there are other people in that body that aren't necessarily going to be abiding by the same rules of the game, actually, to use my own phrase. What does that do to how things work? And along the same lines, so what is that posturing about? How are people negotiating it or reasoning their way through it? How are they promoting themselves or presenting themselves in Congress? And how is that part of the political game? Now, one of the people who, in my book, and just generally speaking, was sort of a prime posture / performance artist, is Henry Wise of Virginia in the House of Representatives in the period of my book, the early half of the period of my book, the 1830s. I think he leaves in the 1840s. I can't remember what year he leaves, but at any rate, he's in Congress for some key decades, and he's very much, I guess at the time, he would have been called a bully, which he didn't like being called. And he tried to bully someone out of calling him a bully. Tells you something about Henry Wise. He's a fascinating character to study because he's like a Virginian sort of plantation owning gentleman to such an extreme degree that it's almost satirical, like it's almost comical. But he was very much a bully who very much came to Congress and explicitly said that he would use violence to promote, as he put it, the interests of his constituents, to do what they sent him here to do, whatever his language was. He was someone who was very much playing at that Southern violence advantage. Now, what's interesting about Wise, and this is what I found interesting when I was first trying to decode what the heck he was doing. He and John Quincy Adams, when John Quincy Adams goes back to the House after being president, and particularly when they are engaging in conflict over a gag rule, basically so that petitions against slavery will not be discussed in Congress. John Quincy Adams wants them to be discussed. Henry Wise really does not want them to be discussed. And so they kind of go against each other. Kind of is actually, they really go against each other in a nasty, aggressive kind of a way, particularly on the part of Wise, who is extremely frustrated because he can't threaten John Quincy Adams, who is a former president, who is elderly, and who is the son of a founder. So on many counts, Wise can't like hold his fist up or threaten to, meet him outside. And that frustrates the heck out of him. And on one occasion, he says in public during debate to Adams, if you weren't who you are, you would feel more than the wrath of my words. And Adams writes in his diary that night, oh, Henry Wise threatened to kill me in my seat today. So the message was received. Now, the interesting thing about Wise and Adams is that if you were just to look at their engagement on the floor of Congress, what you would see is Wise in one way or another insulting and trying in some way to get one over on Adams, to tie him in knots, to get him to contradict himself, to get other people to gang up against him, basically being a bully in any way that he can think possible, including, attacking verbally and humiliating. I mean, really anything he can think of to do, he's going to throw it at John Quincy Adams. Adams is a tough contender. So, Adams, he's not an easy mark. He is a master of parliamentary procedure. He has a sharp wit, really sardonic, sarcastic way of slicing at people. So he's a contender. But what's interesting is you see in the congressional record, the two of them smacking at each other. And then on this one occasion in Adams's diary, which is an amazing historical resource, I will note, Newby is very excited by posturing. You are posturing now, Newby, are you not? He very much is. John Quincy Adams' diary is amazing as a historical document because he kept it forever. And he really notes down, often his thoughts, and not just, George Washington's diary is often like it's this temperature today, walked in the West Field, less exciting. John Quincy Adams talks about what's happening to him in his political life. And in his diary, he notes that on one occasion, Henry Wise stood up and did the full posturing, performing, attacking, humiliating, being the sort of strutting Virginia slaveholder act that he does in the House. And after it was done, he quietly went up to Adams when he was no longer the center of attention and said to Adams, you think we could actually talk about this in person, like after, because I mean, it would be really useful for us to have a conversation about this. Making it clear, right, that he was performing, talk about posturing, that what he was doing was what he felt his constituents wanted him to do, but he felt perfectly comfortable going up to Adams afterwards as a colleague, saying, maybe there's some way we could talk this through. I think there actually might be. And Adams, he could have been nasty and says back, I don't know if there's a lot of common ground between us, but thanks for the thought. That really struck me when I found that, because it shows you the degree to which some of what's going on, and I'm just going to backpedal my way into the present, but it shows you the degree to which much of what's happening, particularly in legislative bodies that are in some way or another open to the public, or in which their proceedings are easily seen or read about by the public, how some of what's going on there is really performance. Now, Wise, he kind of said things you weren't supposed to say, which is useful for a historian. And he said on occasion, I'm here and I'm being, basically he doesn't use the word obnoxious, but I'm doing what I do because my constituents want me to do it. Like, you put me here to behave this way, and that's what I'm doing. And if you don't want it, you won't put me here. But the fact of the matter is, you want it. And he's right? Because this is the era in Congress when people, one-term wonders is very common, right? So you get elected, you serve your term, you go. He's reelected 6 times. So his constituents are like, excellent, whatever it is you're doing, the bullying, he gets involved in duels, he beats people on the floor, he's interesting in the sense that he's not some backroom brawler. He's a, educated gentleman who behaves this way because it's a way that Southerners behave sometimes, and his constituents love it and reward him for it. And when at one point it's threatened that he will be censured, or even booted out, he essentially says, bring it. You bring it. You do it. You censure me. You expel me, because guess what's going to happen? I'm going to be reelected, and I will be right back here. And I will be even more obnoxious when I come back, because my constituents will have really aggressively told me they want me to do this. So there is someone who's very assertively using posturing to appeal to what is in essence his base, and that's having a real impact on the floor. Now, that's the thing about this kind of posturing and performance, is that obviously it may be aimed at the public, but it has an impact on the floor. There was a name for speeches that were along those lines in the, I guess, probably came out in the 1830s or 1840s, speeches that were very explicitly aggressive and nasty and, out yelling and gesturing and, the sort of thing that would get a lot of attention. Those were called Buncombe speeches, Buncomb. I think there's an E at the end, after Buncombe, North Carolina. They were called that because there was a North Carolina congressman who would routinely stand up and give these rip-roaring, howling, accusatory speeches, and then turn to the room and say, folks, this is for Buncombe. So basically saying, whatever I'm saying here, this is for the folks back home. Unlike now, it's not as though he would say that and everyone would know that instantly. We know that because people would write that in their letters, that that's what he said, and they come to be called Buncombe speeches, which is where the word bunk comes from, right? Bunk meaning a big bunch of nonsense, comes from Congress, comes from this North Carolina congressman. But again, performing for a home audience, you could say performing for his base, but it has an impact on the floor. And in this case, there's another North Carolina congressman, is the wonderful name, David Outlaw, which you just gotta love. And David Outlaw wrote at least once a day to his wife every day. It's an amazing cluster of letters which reveal a lot about the culture and the doings of Congress throughout the time that he's in Congress. And he in particular hates what he calls Buncombe days, right? So there are certain days that are designated to be open to that kind of oratory and speechifying, and he it's going to be bad. Whatever happens that day, it's going to be bad because, and these are his words, he hates Buncombe days because they always produce excitement and fan the bad feeling of which heaven knows there is enough already. So even though it's performing, even though it's aimed at a base audience, obviously, if someone stands up and throws this extreme language all over the place in a legislative body surrounded by people who are being affected by the insults and claims, it will have an impact on the body itself. It can't help but have an impact on the body itself. And that's some of what you see in the period leading up to the Civil War. It's a period of extreme politics. You have people who are performing to their base in the way that they think their base wants them to what you're mad at these people for saying what they're saying about slavery, rip-roaring language and everything else that they're doing on the floor. And that makes it very difficult for the institution of Congress itself to operate functionally. It alters and worsens the relationship between members of Congress. So, I use the word posturing, I use the word performative. My problem with those words is it suggests that this kind of behavior is meaningless, powerless, or just performance, but it's not. It has a very deep impact, not just on the sort of political ethos as a whole, but even on the institution, in this case, of Congress, where that language is being tossed around, despite the fact that people know some of that language is really not aimed at anyone on the floor. In 1856, there's a document that I found. Some of the things I'm offering you today are, the sorts of things you find, and you're like, you sing historian hosannas, like, oh, this is the greatest document. This is one of those documents. It was in the collection of papers of a Speaker of the House, a Republican Speaker of the House, and in the 1856. So at a period then when the Republican Party is rising and the slavery controversy, Sumner's caning, and that's quite a year, 1856. And he gets, the Speaker of the House gets a note that's clearly from a Southern member of Congress, but it's anonymous. It's signed a Wellwisher. And I want to just read you a paragraph from it because it plugs right into what I'm talking about here. He writes, "Do you know, sir, that there exists at this time an almost murderous feeling between certain members of the North and South, and that it is with some difficulty that a few peace-loving and happily influential associates can prevent demonstrations upon the floor, which in the present state of excitement would almost certainly lead to a general melee and perhaps a dozen deaths in the twinkling of an eye." And he then goes on and says, don't throw missiles. And by missiles, he means aggressive, nasty words. Don't throw missiles, right? don't stand up and do that kind of speechifying because, that's a pretty extreme statement. A dozen deaths in the twinkling of an eye, and knowing what I know about, bloodshed and combat in Congress, maybe not a dozen deaths, but there probably would have been bloodshed. So at any rate, there he is explicitly saying, I know you guys, you want to, I'm trying to keep Southerners from doing that sort of thing. Would you, Mr. Speaker of the House, who happens to be a Northerner Republican, would you do that with your friends? Would you stop them from throwing missiles? Because it'll get really bad here. It'll get bloody and ugly here. And that obviously will have a huge impact on the nation at large. So, in a democracy, that sort of appeal, that sort of way of speechifying for your base, for the public, in a sense, it has to happen, right? Because, and I said this any number of times on this webcast before, in a democratic republic, public opinion matters, right? The public has the power. The public grants power. The public can take it away. That we are the people, there's a reason why politicians are supposed to be and are considered public servants, right? They're supposed to be serving us and serving the common good. So the public opinion matters, even to people who are not really excited about democracy at all times. Still, at this moment, they know the public opinion matters. So they are performing and they are posturing in part to get through to that public. But what they're doing has a wider impact than just that sort of democratic component of engaging with their public. It has an impact on the institution of Congress, institutions generally, the functioning of the government, public opinion writ large, right? If there's a lot of extreme rhetoric and it's particularly powerful and it gets rewritten, or in our case, retweeted, focused, sent all around Facebook, that kind of rhetoric, obviously, in the technological age that we're in, can have a huge amount of impact, so that words are never just words, and particularly at times of extremes, like we're in now, and that actually the 1850s were another such time, posturing is posturing, but it's more than that at the same time. So, and you can see now that we're kind of wrangling with this problem, right? That there are in Congress people who are very deliberately saying extreme, aggressive, nasty things, very deliberately to get supporters roused, to build up their reputation, promote themselves as real fighters, all of the things that I'm not going to name any names, but you can fully imagine what I'm talking about, right? These are people who are doing what they are doing because it helps them, and it also helps, I suppose, foster whatever kind of nation they want this nation to be. And although we can look at that and we can say, oh, come on, like, really? You're going to pose that way and send that out as a campaign message? And we know exactly what it is you're saying. And although some people might like it, a lot of us don't like it. And really? Like, that seems to you like responsible legislating? No, it's a longstanding tradition of pandering to the public in one way or another. I mean, actually, all the way back, Hamilton in 1801, after the Federalists lose the election of 1800, one of the things he says is the Republicans were better at pandering to the public than the Federalists are. We have to get better at pandering to the public. So again, in a democratic mode of government, pandering to the public is part of the game. But the challenge comes when that kind of posturing and pandering and performing, the three Ps, are being transmitted around the nation with great speed and efficiency. In the early 1850s, it's the telegraph. Now it's social media and Facebook and everything else that's happening now to circulate things quickly. It isn't just posturing. It really becomes a political action, right? And so that's what we're seeing, is a political climate be created and a political action being taken, even though these are seemingly just words or performances of bravado, they have an impact. Now, this, as I was making my comments up this morning, I sort of got to this point, and then I thought, wow, so I've gotten us to a point where these people who are appealing with this posturing to the public are kind of potentially poisoning the climate on the floor and the climate in the country, and breeding extremism and or hatred and or an inability to come together and actually debate and compromise, which might be easy to forget. That's supposed to be what our government is doing. So if what I'm talking about, this posturing, gets us to this dysfunctional way of behaving, where do I go from here in my comments? And so this is what I want to say as I'm concluding what I'm saying and about to open things up to questions. Some of the posturing and some of the performing, there's more to it. It's louder than it is effective. And by that, I mean, there are a lot of loud, angry people being very loud and angry right now in public. And what I encourage you to think about is, number one, although what they're saying and doing can poison the climate, political climate in any number of ways, it's also a deliberate way to be loud and be heard. So I urge you not to hear that and see that and feel that what you think and what you do and how you vote doesn't matter, because it does. The thing about bullying, the thing about threats of violence and people trying to drown out what you're saying or thinking by yelling or calling you names, the thing about it is it relies for its impact on the threat of carrying it through, but it doesn't have to be carried through to have that impact. So in other words, what I saw in Congress in the 1850s was threat after threat after threat being thrown by Southerners. 99% of those threats are only threats. But that 1% that gets carried out, the actual beatings, the actual duel, that's enough to convince anyone that, well, I don't know what, what's going on here might affect me, so I feel intimidated and I'm going to back away. So what I'm urging you to think about, I guess, is number one, don't feel drowned out because there are loud voices saying violent, angry, hate-based things. Don't feel drowned out because they are trying to make you think that. They are trying to silence you, intimidate you into silence or compliance, and that's the wrong response. And I tweeted this out yesterday because I was feeling, I don't know what spilled over me when I was sort of scrolling through Twitter yesterday, but my sort of momentary response was, oh, holy moly. I wasn't going to say moly. This is like washing over me, this extremism, and it's making me feel despair. And that's not useful. Despair is not useful. Responding and hearing that kind of language and saying, oh, well, I guess it's kind of over. Look at them, they're behaving that way and people are resigning from offices or people are backing down or people, whatever. The response to that, the sort of best response to that isn't just to sit down and say, oh, well, it's over. It isn't. It isn't. And the reason for the loud attacks is because they know it isn't over either. And so part of what I want to encourage here at the end of my comments is to remember that those performances are performances for an impact. They don't necessarily represent confidence, quite the opposite. They sometimes represent angst about something that they feel they have no control over. And so they're deploying hatred and outrage and threats of violence to try and push people into siding with them in a way that they're not fully confident people will do. So, and Newbie is fully in agreement with me. He's flapping his wings and everything. Thank you, Newbie. But yes, feeling drowned out and silencing yourself and surrendering because, it feels as though it's over, not useful and not true. And so I guess, often I will conclude on some of these morning conversations by saying words matter. Think about your emotional responses to words before you respond, because some of that kind of language is just intended to get you riled up. Here, I'm kind of saying a variation on that, which is some of this loud, extreme language is there to be loud and extreme. And it's a sign of the fact that the demographics aren't with them and they know it. And what that means is we shouldn't sit down and shut up. We should express what we're thinking. We should tell our members of Congress what we want. We should call them and email them. We should make demonstrations of what we think. We should have town hall meetings, whether or not members of Congress are there or not, in which groups of people get together and express what they want. And yes, there might be people trying to silence and shout people down. However, that we have power. People have power when they express what they want and need and do it in an organized, sustained way. because in a democratic mode of government, and we are still there, in that mode of government, we have power. We have to believe that, though. We need to believe that and not surrender to what we think is inevitable. I'm going to say it. Things are still contingent, right? Contingency. There's nothing that is absolute in this moment. And that's so important to remember. So somehow or other, a combination of this topic and whatever I saw on Twitter yesterday has sort of got me to land in a space where what I really want to say is, live with your eyes open and see what's going on around you, but don't surrender and assume that it's all over, because it isn't. And if you assume that, it will be. So don't, like we should be working together in one way or another and not simply surrendering to what feels like an impossible, I don't want to use, what's the word I want to use? An impossible, I won't say battle. I was like, I don't want to say war, I don't want to say battle, I don't like all these sort of actual fighting metaphors. I don't want to say that, but at any rate, you get my point. We shouldn't surrender anything at this point, and we should remember that posturing and performance and bullying sometimes has an impact, a broad impact, but it's still posturing and performance, and that what may seem like that subtle difference is really important to remember as we sort of feel our way through our current really difficult political climate. So I guess that's where I want to end. I wrote down on the bottom of my sheet of paper here, a politics of outrage is a dangerous thing, which I think is true. I didn't use that phrase, but I'm offering it to you because I think politics of outrage made me happy when I wrote it down this morning. But I now see it, Carolee on the bottom. I've even been trying not to look in the chat. And there on the bottom is Carolee saying mug, mug, mug. If there's anyone here this week who is new, every week there's a mug that is thematically related to whatever it is that we're talking about. And somehow for 77 weeks, I managed pretty much to do that. So actually, Carolee, this is a Carolee related mug. And Newbie really cooperated with my mug choice today, because if there's ever someone who's posturing, it's the noobs. He is a posturing creature. He lives for impact. So Carolee made this a newbie mug, a different newbie mug from the one that NCHE sells. And so this was my choice before I knew he was going to perform so effectively today. This is my posturing mug. And it says, "Good morning, I'm cute, and that's the news" by Newbie the History Bird. Thank you, Carolee, for creating that newbie mug. This is one of my favorite little pictures of him because he looks so expectant somehow. Okay, now Matt.
I've seen no guesses. No guesses.
Okay, I'm going to open chat so that I can now see what people are saying, but no guesses.
No guesses yet. It is in, I'll tell you, it is in the DC area.
Oh, okay.
This is very hard. So I'm totally fine if nobody gets it, but the background for today, I was trying to think, posturing, who is probably one of the greatest posturers, and so I chose somebody is one of my favorite historical moments.
Oh,
and Bess got it. It is Joseph McCarthy's Capitol Hill house.
oh, wow.
That's impressive, Beth, sorry.
Yes. How did you do that?
That was very impressive.
Very impressive.
So yes, Joseph McCarthy is, I mean, that whole House On-American Activities Committee and Joseph McCarthy.
Have you no decency, sir?
Yes, one of my favorite historical moments, and so I could not let it pass without dropping in the infamous Joseph McCarthy at least once. So.
Excellent. That is posturing indeed. But in that case, the posturing had a real kickback. Really came back to slap him in the face.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And now as I was listening to your talk, now all I have is the line from the movie Clue. stuck in my head, which is communism was just a red herring. So
Wow. Okay. That I can guarantee you was not in my head.
I know, but this is how my brain works, and sometimes that kind of stuff happens. So I
you
do
know,
want to.
oh, go ahead.
Oh no, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've been working on this op-ed a long time. I'm having a hard time writing, I will confess. I confess to the public. But one of the things I wrote about, there's a paragraph on that moment, the have you no decency moment. And, it's the essay is on the importance of accountability. Surprise, it's not a surprise coming from me, but that was an accountability moment in which, he was doing what he does, McCarthy, and someone held him accountable for it. Really?
Yeah.
You're going to do that?
Yeah.
And it had an impact. I mean, it didn't immediately destroy him, but it sure helped.
And what's interesting is he died so shortly after that all died down. Sorry for the bad choice of words, but I've always wondered what if he had lived longer, would he have experienced some kind of resurgence? Maybe
I would, prefer not to
like
think
in the
about
early
that right
60s
now.
or something like that. I'm just, it's I wonder if he would have had a second political life, and you know what I mean?
Which is not impossible at all.
Yeah. I think of Nixon, who, when he passed away, people just totally forgot all of the things from basically 1968 to 1974.
The speed of forgetting.
Yeah.
It's quite a thing.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Well, right. I mean, we don't have to talk about this right now, but the speed with which January 6th is being retold in some imaginary, creative, totally fake way.
Yeah.
It's like in the same year, and people are like, oh, this happened this way. It didn't happen this way. It's like, but I saw it, you saw it, newbie saw it, we watched it. So, yeah.
I do want to say out loud that there are only 4 questions in here, and folks, okay. I'm telling you, you do not want to listen to me. You want to listen to yourselves. No, I promise you.
Threaten us with your questions at the beginning, and I was going to applaud you, like.
Well, they've been so great at getting lots of questions in, so I didn't feel the need. But there's only 4 in, so we will start with those 4 and then go from there. Okay. So Dale, of course, one of our longtime favorite folks here, wants to know, would you agree that the executive branch has been the epitome of posturing beginning with Washington?
Beginning with Washington. Well, I guess I would say yes and no, which is a very historian answer. Yes, in the sense that, and it's one of the reasons why. So at the Constitutional Convention, the Federal Convention, the idea was raised of not having a single national executive president, but of having an executive council. And the thought was, you don't give one man that much power. You have a council, it's divided between people, that you're going to get less likely that you end up with a king, which was always assumed to be the default at that period of time. But that was voted down for a number of reasons, and one of them had to do with just simple efficiency. But another reason that was discouraged was that if you have 3 men, they can hide behind each other when they do something wrong. They can do something and then like, oh no, it wasn't me, it was him, it wasn't me, it was him. So in other words, they weren't going to be individually visible in the same way. So in a sense, it was a performance issue that was at heart. So a single executive is someone who is going to be watched. I don't think, and I think Washington and Jefferson, these early presidents, Adams, don't want to leave out Adams, knew that how they were behaving, their performance mattered enormously. In their case, it was partly to prove that they weren't kings or not trying to be kings, but their mode of performance, although aspects of it at different times may have been in line with their vision of what they wanted the nation to be. And so in that sense, they were partisan. They were more trying to live up to some standard of what a president should be, a Republican inflected president or a Federalist inflected president. So yes, I do think presidents are always about performance, but I think that's had a really different meaning over time. And I think the response to that performance, I'm always amazed when I think about FDR and the fact that the press basically agreed to not show a lot of images of him in which the fact that he essentially couldn't walk, that they weren't going to show it.
Mhm.
Can you imagine?
Right.
It would never happen. And
Yeah.
not only that, there would be like cartoons about it and people would be talking about it constantly. And it would be, in front of us all the time. It would be like a vulnerability as opposed to kind of an assumption that, well, this is not what we want our president to look like, whether you like him or not. So
Right.
I do think performance always, the president always has a kind of mode of performing that is different from other politicians. And it is in part because they represent the nation in a way that other kinds of politicians don't necessarily. And if you're representing the nation, then yeah, your appearance and your manners and your behavior and everything else becomes representative of the nation. So you're right. But it would be interesting to look at how standards of performance change over time. And how the audience does or doesn't respond. That would be an interesting thing to know. So yes, but is my answer.
Yes, well, I'm reminded of that wonderful story you told of the literal president's suit that Washington, like he had the visitor, and that sticks out with what you just said.
Right. Actually, I'll retell it in case people didn't hear it, but that's totally true. Washington he was very carefully trying to create what a president was, because there hadn't been one before. And there's this anecdote that's in my first book. Thank you, Matt, for remembering it. I love this anecdote, in which Washington is at home and he's at dinner with friends, and someone calls at the front door with a question for the president. And Washington goes upstairs or wherever his bedroom is, puts on what is in essence his president's suit, and comes downstairs and answers the question, then goes back upstairs and changes back into what he's wearing before and goes back to the dinner. So he literally put on the presidency to answer this question and then took it off and went back to dinner. Mm-hmm. So yeah, definitely that's hyper performance. He's doing it, he was trying to be a leader that on the one hand was elevated above the common sort so that he would be respected and the government would have some authority and gravitas and the world would respect it. But on the other hand, not so dignified and pomp related that he would seem monarchical in any way. And his black suit, his plain black suit, which anyone who's seen portraits of him from this time period, you've got that black suit in your mind, that to him was the president's suit, mm-hmm. right? It's like dignified and yet simple. They were trying to, not just Washington, invent a style of governance, mm-hmm. which wasn't just a matter of style, it was a matter of national character at a point where the nation didn't really have one yet.
And so just to tease out the executive branch issue just a little bit more, as I was listening to your answer, which was fantastic, of course, but I was just thinking, I wonder if being on the cabinet gave you more freedom to posture. And I was thinking of, of course, Hamilton and Jefferson posturing against one another, and with the National Bank and some of those issues. And I don't know, does that hold water, I guess is the question for you. Does being on an executive branch cabinet give you more license to posture in ways that the presidency maybe doesn't, especially in like a historical context?
Well, part of the answer to that is no, because if you're part of the cabinet, you represent the president.
Okay.
So whatever you're doing isn't going to be seen in isolation. So, like during Washington's presidency, Hamilton smacking at Jefferson or doing things in the newspaper, never under his own name, which of course no one would do. They were all using pseudonyms, but still. Mm-hmm. But even that, an anecdote I was going to talk about today when I first thought of this topic, and then I kind of ended up getting sidetracked into Henry Wise. There's a Hamilton story about how during the conflict over the assumption of state debts, and he was trying to figure a way out of the standstill, and he says to someone, this is a bad paraphrase, I'm going to be walking along the Battery tomorrow afternoon, maybe around 1:00. If you happen to be walking down near the Battery at maybe 1:00, we might have a conversation, and it might be a really interesting conversation. So he doesn't want to actually be like, let's you and I meet and talk about this, because that would have implications. But he goes out of his way to create this spontaneous conversation that will look, that's a performance of a non-meeting. So, it's the sort of things that interests me so much in my own work, is the degree to which presentation and performance is politics. And if you know that, it's really going to shape and politicize things that you do in a way that people might not consider. That's another great example of it. But I think I hate to retreat into the yes and no of historians, but in that case, there's an important yes, it would still be political.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody's finally taking my threat seriously. So Dave A asks, did the bullies who were posturing in Dr. Freeman's book, e.g. that time frame, from gerrymandered districts, which seems to be the case over the past 2 or so decades? So were these people from gerrymandered districts, or was it reflection of regionalism? I think is what Dave is getting at here.
I mean, certainly if you're looking at the late 1840s and 1850s, you're looking at regionalism, because by that point, so the book goes from the 1830s up to the Civil War. And in the earlier period, the 1830s, it's more about party than it is necessarily about slavery. So then it actually is a matter of who votes for who and who has power. But by the time you get to the second half of the book, it's slavery, for any number of reasons, has risen to be the central issue that never goes away. And it obviously that's a regional issue. And so what's going on isn't about gerrymandering at all, which is why people like Henry Wise could be like, I'm standing up for the South, and I'm standing up for slavery, and I'm fighting anti-slavery people, and you put me here to do that, and I'm going to keep doing it. And the assumption is, and as a matter of fact, in the course of doing my research, I would find people who didn't necessarily agree with the Southern pro-slavery stance, but they would, actually, this relates to what I just said, they wouldn't pipe up and say something because they were afraid to. Because they if you stand up and say something that isn't along the lines of what the majority thinks here, you're putting yourself in trouble. And so they self-censure themselves, they silence themselves, which is not good.
I'm sorry, I was just looking at I was curious what happened to Henry Wise after that, and it turns out he was apparently
he becomes governor of Virginia.
Yep, and he was a general in the Confederate Army.
He's a general in the Confederate Army. He is the man responsible for signing John Brown's death warrant.
Correct. Yeah.
He's a fascinating character.
Why I said correct to an expert, I don't know. Sorry.
Because you're looking at it right in front of you. No, he's fascinating, and he ends up being a little bit sympathetic to sort of the Northern cause afterwards, but he won't take any oath. He remains unreconstructed after the Civil War. He's a weird dude, Henry Wise. He truly is a weird dude. Really interesting though. Because he's so detestable, but so weirdly human at the same time. Like someone catches him during an overnight session, walking up to congressmen who are asleep, and he has a little slip of paper, and he's tickling their nose to see if they'll sneeze or wake up. And he's detestable, and yet that's like, it's kind of hard to hate that, right? That kind of makes him human in a way that you almost don't want him to be.
Right.
So he's an interesting character in his way.
Well, I don't want to belabor the conversation with my questions, but I just happened to think of Tim Johnson, of our multiple Tims here, asks a fantastic question, which we rarely touch on this show. So I definitely want to touch on this. He says, in more recent times, it seems like we and others have used the United Nations as a platform for posturing. Was there a similar platform which involved foreign relations for posturing in our earlier history? We don't talk about international relations a whole lot.
No, it's true. We don't.
Yeah. So this is a good question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of the answer to that question is official platform or not, they were noticed and they mattered. And you can go all the way back. You could talk about the outrage over the Jay Treaty in 1795, right? Oh, it's too easy on the British. We hate that. And the fact that there were public demonstrations, and Hamilton gets involved in 2 near duels, and people get very worked up about and are very plugged into foreign relations. I've probably made this point before that particularly in the early part of American history, you can't separate foreign and domestic affairs. Because domestic affairs kind of center at that point on foreign affairs. The big questions are who sides with us and who doesn't side with us, and are we going to be contaminated by France or England, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So domestic politics kind of swirled around foreign relations all the time. So in a way, there didn't have to be a separate platform. I think people were plugged into it. They were throughout this time period. So, I think maybe Heather Richardson and I talked about this a little during one of our early podcast episodes when we talked about foreign affairs, and about the fact that in modern times, foreign affairs is kind of shunted off sometimes, or not really looked at in some ways until there's a single incident that gets focused on, but that interestingly, it isn't talked about in the way that it has been at some points in the past.
Maureen and Francesca asks similar questions, and I'm going to try to put them together here, which Maureen asks, how do we as individuals mute the bullies who reflect the threats of leaders? And Francesca asks, how do we distinguish between posturing and threats? And so maybe, how do we distinguish between posturing and threats, and then mute the threat and understand the posturing?
Which is a complex question. I mean, part of the answer, and I thought about when I was sort of at the end of my comments this morning and trying to think about what I wanted to say, I didn't write it down, but one of the things I was thinking was, it's a fine line between responding to nonsense and repeating nonsense, right? So personally, the posturing and the screaming and the extremism and the ways to get attention, sometimes I will respond to them by explicitly not repeating the words, not retweeting the image, not giving them more airtime, but instead saying, nowadays I find myself thinking about this, and then responding. So part of the answer to that is don't give them more airtime. That's what they want. And outrage, right? That's what many people want to, is they want to tick you off, they want to own you. So I want to give them that. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't respond or talk about it. So that kind of has to do with how we talk about it more than anything else. And you're right. How do you differentiate between posturing and an actual threat? Part of the answer to that is there sometimes isn't a distinction, right? Because if you're posturing and tossing off threats, even if you're not trying to follow through on them, you're normalizing that idea, you're normalizing that thought. And in that sense, it is a threat. So, which is part of why it gets back to, even if it's a performance, it has an importance to it that, you don't necessarily want to give the person tossing off that kind of nonsense a reward for that on the one hand. On the other hand, it matters that it's happening. And we need to register that it matters that it's happening. I think it's really easy to forget that loudness doesn't equal majority, but loudness can equal power if you're silenced by it. Bless you, Matt. My mother would have said, you're sneezing on the truth. So anyway, I think part of what my work says is that there isn't a clear line, but it's important to think about that difference. I did say podcast, you guys. I can see them playing bingo there. Yeah.
Well, folks, I think we have time for one more question. And so I think Kathleen's is a really nice one to end with, because it's, I think, I'm going to guess Joanne might have something to say about this, which is, are there any mechanisms in the Constitution to slow things down currently in our society, let passions cool, and encourage reflection and deliberation? Are there any constitutional mechanisms?
In part, having two houses in Congress, it's not the reason for that, but that was assumed to be something that two houses might do, is that things don't get immediately passed and they're done. There's a done deal, but there's a process with steps in it. But if you're talking about things to calm down public sentiment, not really, right? I mean, so one of the surprises in the first years of the government, the national government, is the degree to which people get riled up particularly presidential elections. That was the big surprise. Watching the response, and it was particularly true of Federalists who are never all that comfortable with mass democracy. After that 1800 election, there are a lot of Federalists, they're writing to each other and they're saying, holy smoke, Americans got so riled up about that presidential election and they took two sides and it almost divided the nation in half. And what a horrible thing that was. The public, we can't let that happen again. But that was a surprise, right? Not that they were surprised that people get riled up and upset about politics. That's always the state of affairs. But the question is, what happens when politics is on a national level, and what do those kinds of divisions mean? So I would say, and I'm sure if I walk away in 10 minutes, I'll think of some explicit thing, but the Constitution, and I know I've said this before, really in so many ways is a frame of a government. And some of the things we're talking about here, which is like, speed and passion and anger and outrage and implications, that it was always assumed that some of that was going to be worked out in the doing of it. And that it doesn't always play out the same way in the doing of it because time changes, we don't live in a constant world. And so the short answer to that is that that's not what the Constitution was really trying to do per se, although it was creating a government that was a democratic representative government. But then what you see in the 1790s is a lot of Federalists saying, yeah, let's talk about what this democratic part of that actually means. I'm not so sure about that. So some of that is being worked out in the doing of it.
Well, we are right at 11 o'clock, so I'm going to call it. But I just want to thank everybody for being here. And as always, if you do like what we're doing, make sure you join us. Go to our website, www.ncheteach.org, and join us on social media. At History Ed is our handle at both Twitter and Facebook and /Instagram. So please find us, enjoy us. And then of course, Joanne and I are both individually on Twitter. I know you all follow her, but you are welcome to say hi to me on the one tweet I send about every week that it would. But it's lovely to see you all, and I will turn it over to Joanne for our transition to the after party.
Indeed. I want to thank you all for coming. As I always say, thank you for taking part in this kind of conversation about our politics and the background of it and the history of it, because it really matters, and it particularly matters now when the actual doing of democracy is under debate and in many ways being threatened. So thank you for 77 weeks for showing up and taking part in this, because it matters, and not just to me and Matt. It really does matter in a lot of ways. I talk about it all the time as a sign of the fact that people care about these sorts of things enough to tune in here and stay for sometimes 90 minutes. But this really does matter. As I said, as Carolee made me the mug, it says, thank you for engaging in democracy this Friday morning. I will offer that again. Now, we are going to segue into the after party. For anyone who's new, what that means is you can stay right here if you beamed in online directly through the NCHE link. Stay right here and we will stop recording what we're doing so that we can be a little freer and easier with our conversation, and we'll see where the conversation takes us. So it's just a more informal version in which we're open to discuss whatever the heck you want to talk about, but you won't be on the record for it, so you'll be safe. If you are watching on Facebook and you want to join us for the after party, you need to leave Facebook and join us through the link ncheteach.org/conversations. So for those of you who will not stay around for the after party, have a wonderful week. Stay safe. I was going to say stay cold, stay warm. Who the heck knows what the weather's going to be this week?
Yeah, it's fall. Give it 10 minutes. It'll change.
It would pretty much. But at any rate, everyone have a good week. And we will see what surprises bring us to whatever the heck topic we talk about next Friday.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Okay. After party segue.